Hello and welcome to another RDP video. This one's quite a special one, not just because it's on the idea of the public intellectual, but because we also have a special guest to talk about public intellectualism, especially, I guess we could say, in the 21st century, which means to say exploring the role of the public intellectual in the age of things like YouTube and social media. So I'm going to hand over to our special guest, Joram. Joram, would you like to introduce yourself formally to all the folks out there?
Yeah, of course. I'm Joram Appel. I am from the Netherlands and I'm 26 years old. And I started off when I was, I think, 19. I was studying journalism, so I got right into the new media, learned about that, learned editing, learned video production. But my heart was always with history. So I decided to do a pre-master's and a master's at the university here in Utrecht, where I did my master's in cultural history. And soon I figured out that what I found was most interesting in the field of cultural history or history in general was public history. So I started reading on public forms of history and started combining it with my background in journalism. And soon, new media forms of history were the field in which I started professionalizing, right? And then it was time to pick a internship. And I was, at the time, I was a fan of The Great War, where Indy Nidell, my current boss, was doing World War I week by week from 1914 in 2014 to 1918, exactly 100 years later after it happened. And so I went to Berlin. That was where the studio is, still is. And I did my internship there for 3 months, and I got familiar with the practice of public history on YouTube. And then I finished my master's. Obviously, I wrote my thesis on YouTube in public history. So I got myself very familiar with everything from a theoretical side and a practical side. Sadly, it's in Dutch. I can't share it with you. Well, I can, but I'm not going to get to you. And then soon after I finished my my master's, Indy started with a new project covering World War II week by week, exactly 79 years after it happened. And then he was doing that together with, I will get into that later a bit, with Spartacus and Asteroid. And I was the first one they hired, since they needed someone to do both the history stuff and the production stuff with knowledge of how history and new media work together.
Brilliant, brilliant. Oh, thank you very much, Joram, for that biography there. And I think it's really useful for the students out there to kind of understand your background and give a bit of context and sort of reassure them that you are somebody who knows what they're talking about, and certainly you are, going by your verbal CV. I suppose some of the or a lot of the experiences from the Great War Project were quite instrumental in helping get Time Coast off the ground, I imagine. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, especially the way of structuring the episodes, transforming academic history research into something that is well, easy to digest for a larger audience.
Yeah.
And so they already started experimenting with a structure for the episodes, and what's the proper length, what's the proper tone, how do we work with YouTube in growing the audience and monetizing this, because obviously Mediacraft 2 was a company and they wanted to make money with this. Yeah. So they weren't going to put money in it forever, so they really needed a way to monetize this, and they managed to do so in the end. So those lessons, and in general the lessons that Spartacus learned while working for this big production company, came in handy when starting Time Rush, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, well, the points you just said there actually, I think, highlight the kind of dual aspects that are sort of underpinning our conversation today, and I think would underpin any kind of public intellectual project, and that is the kind of logistical or practical side of things. And then there's a sort of theoretical, even ethical side of things. So, practically speaking, we're thinking of, how we can sustain public intellectualism or that kind of activity, how we can fund it, but also how we can, design things, create content that is meaningful for its audience. You talked about finding the right length and the right sort of format, and I think that's really important. It's not just simply the case of going on YouTube and, talking about whatever you want to talk about for 20 or 30 minutes. You have to design it and deliver it in a way that is engaging for the audience. So that's that aspect. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, not just that though. It's more than that. I would say, because we, and again I will get back to that. We exist because of our community and our viewer base. So we're not just thinking about how do we bring history to these people, but also how do we create a community at the same time, and how do we interest them to fund us and or to volunteer for us or work together with us, because this project, and a lot of creators are saying this, but it's 100% true. We would not be doing this if it wasn't for our community. It wouldn't have been possible. We don't get any public funding. We only recently started getting some commercial funding, but for the rest, it's, well, like paid by the people who watch it and find it important and interesting enough to do so.
That's really interesting, and I guess that's another aspect that makes this kind of work quite different from the more traditional or orthodox mediums for public intellectualism. So I'm thinking here of radio, television, broadsheet, which has pretty much been the dominant means by which to conduct public intellectualism for the last, I don't know, well, probably since radio began, actually, so for quite some time. And it's very difficult to, I mean, you could still create a community around that, I suppose, but it's not quite as meaningful or easy to cultivate as it is online, I would imagine. Do you think that's a thing to say?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I also worked for several news websites and for a Dutch public broadcasting station. Okay. And you do not get to know your audience in the same way or interact with the audience in the same way. And with the Dutch public broadcasting station, that was an old-fashioned, quite intellectual, highbrow organization, and I did not know who the audience was, other than from their statement saying this is our target audience, because I was never interacting with them. I didn't know how much they consumed, what they thought of it, if we were doing a good job, if we were reaching new people. So it's a completely different way. And also with public intellectualism, with these old media organizations, you would often have journalists or media producers inviting the intellectuals over, and the intellectuals would not own or manage those platforms for themselves. They would be a guest, and they'd come and speak, and they wouldn't have to worry about reaching an audience or producing anything. And we get to do all of that ourselves. We have to, and we get to, which has upsides and downsides, because now we have to worry about editing and community management and publishing and monetization, stuff that usually public intellectuals do not have to worry about, which opens up a whole new line of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose that touches on the sort of practical logistical stuff I was mentioning earlier, so yeah, I think you're right. You can see that as both a massive pro and perhaps a bit of a con too, or a bit of a negative. So, but I guess, if we go back to the orthodox way of doing things, there would only be a very, very small select few amongst the academics who would be selected, who would actually be used, I should say, by the likes of, for example, the BBC, who until relatively recently were really active with the public intellectualism stuff. They still are to some degree, but it's far more limited these days, and I'm not entirely sure why. Yeah, whereas I mean, in theory, anyone sort of academically inclined or anybody with intellectual content could at least attempt to start, let's say, a YouTube channel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost, I guess you could say, it's almost more democratic in a manner of speaking.
It definitely is, theoretically, because while everyone has the equal opportunity to create an audience for themselves and to make their knowledge heard, people without any authority, or people who in the old world wouldn't have any authority on certain topics,
Mm-hmm.
have an equal opportunity to spread a message that may be less informed or responsible. And then all of a sudden you see people who would have authority in university but not on YouTube, going to YouTube and having to compete with people who are very smart with YouTube but may not be historians, but who would still manage to create a bigger audience and to get their message out more effectively than people who actually know what they're talking about, which is, I think, a legitimate danger of YouTube. And the way YouTube works forces you to play YouTube's game, which unfortunately favors those who dramatize and those who create confrontation, or how do you say it? It has to be
I suppose. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm immediately thinking of just YouTube comments alone. That you know, and pretty much any YouTube video I sometimes, it's sort of a bad practice, probably bad for my health and my blood pressure, but I sometimes just go in the comment section just to see what people are saying, and I always find something alarming, and it could be the most innocuous video in the world. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything to do with history or current affairs, and I find something completely outrageous, and I laugh, but it is I think it's a severe problem, and I can't begin to imagine what kind of work must be involved for you guys. You know, you're dealing with well, world history, war, and there's all kinds of issues involved there. You know, and all kinds of, you know, Holocaust denials and that sort of thing, and you know, races, and people get very charged because they have their own hagiographic or ethnocentric understandings of world history, and you know, that I can see that creating quite a problem, and even a sort of chain reaction of comments and hatred.
So it's you're right, it's YouTube comments are quite something to work with, which is why we started doing just 1 hour community management a day per person, because you could do it from days on end, and like new stuff would start coming in, and there's no end to it. I've actually, maybe this is a good time to go to that. I prepared a sheet with some examples of the stuff you can find in our comments, in our comment section. And well, obviously we make a lot of videos, not just about historical events, but about ideology or events that have to do with ideology. And then people would come and they would have an opinion on ideology, or they would share what they think that ideology includes, what it is, what it isn't. Well, for example, here in the top left, I have you read Victor Forrest's book, The Holocaust Hoax Exposed? Great factual book. Well, obviously that is a problematic comment, right? Now we have to ask ourselves, is this person here to debate something, or is he truly unaware of whatever happened during the Holocaust, or does he in fact believe in a Jewish conspiracy? We don't know. So it's very hard to navigate those comments, and we have to be careful doing it. But we do not tolerate any form of anti-Semitism or racism or any partisan debate, because it's not what we're about. It's not what we want to be a platform for. So we police that pretty hard. But then obviously there's a fine line with people who are just naive or ignorant, and people who have an agenda, and they come to spread their vision on history, or just to troll, right? And one of a very common one is the fictified history, right? And that's often being used to discredit anything we say, because, well, you're just presenting a fictitious history. It's not the true version. The history would be different if the Nazis had won. And those people clearly don't understand how historical practice works, that we don't just write history because we have an agenda and we want to tell a certain narrative or a certain version of history, but that our methods should make sure that we have an unbiased overview of history, and that something like a fictitious history, well, obviously something like a fictitious history does exist because of limited access to sources, and stuff like that. But it's not intentional, and people do think it is. So also we have to defend our authority quite often, and people don't just believe us. And I think part of that, because we're on YouTube, and we are a YouTube video next to a YouTube video that says Nazism is socialism, right? And we are arguing that Nazism wasn't socialism because of the definitions of socialism and Nazism that we use. So sometimes it's just a uphill battle, and it turns into a screaming match pretty quickly. So it's hard to navigate, and it can be quite frustrating, yeah.
But I just wanted to pick up a little bit on what you said about sort of defending your authority and historical practice. And I think that's something that would be quite relevant to any students who are thinking about doing kind of public intellectual work, be it on YouTube or whatever format. Having your audience you can't expect that the vast majority of your audience are going to understand the mechanics of research and what's involved, right? Because the whole idea is that you're reaching out to the public. These aren't fellow academics that you're necessarily talking to.
Absolutely.
So there's kind of two things that's kind of going on there. On the one hand, you're wanting to present material to them that's digestible, as the term you used earlier. I think, yeah, quite right. You know, something that they can chow down on, and it makes sense to them. They can engage with it. But also, yeah, as you say as well, you need to establish your authority to be somebody who can do that. And it's, in a weird way, it almost requires a bit of studying to understand the importance of studying. You know, or it takes an engagement with research on some level to understand how meticulous and tightly regulated, generally speaking, research and research methods are. You know, if you've never engaged with that world before, then it's a lot easier to arrive at conclusions such as, you know, you live in an ivory tower. That's a very common one that academics get. You don't live in the real world. You're out of touch. Do you have an agenda? I mean, we saw that in the United Kingdom very prominently during the EU referendum. And I don't know if you're aware of this, because obviously it's very much a UK thing, but during the referendum, quite a high-ranking government politician, and he's still in government now, his name is Michael Gove. He came out, you know, he was supporting the Leave side, and he came out and he said, in response to all these economists who were forecasting doom and gloom if we left the EU, he came out and said, you know what, people are sick and tired of experts. You know, as if it was a kind of aesthetic choice, you know, and within that is this idea that truth is completely relative. And of course, there's a philosophical point to be made about how we understand truth and that sort of thing, but that's on a far more nuanced level. What I'm talking about here is when relativism is invoked just to basically undermine something that you don't agree with or that you're uncomfortable with, and that's a huge problem that I think academics, just generally speaking, have to deal with when engaging with the public. Sadly,
I guess that's, or as you said, that relativism is also, well, it's a big part of a big problem of being an intellectual on YouTube, because there's always going to be someone else who might look just as much of an authority as you are, who says the opposite.
Yeah.
It's not hard to get your views confirmed on YouTube, whatever you think. And YouTube actually has a algorithm that makes those issues worse. Now, I was listening to a new podcast by the New York Times called The Rabbit Hole. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's relatively new, and it's about this. It's about this young man. I think he's my age, and he was watching YouTube, and he got into all these right-wing pundits who were like spreading a lot of. They were the voice of the alt-right on YouTube, right? And they were huge. They had a huge reach. Some channels had over 4 million subscribers. And then this podcast explores how, because of YouTube's algorithm, he got more and more down the rabbit hole. He was watching more stuff like he was already watching, and it was becoming more and more right-wing. More racist stuff showed up in there, more anti-Semitic stuff, and YouTube was making that stronger every time he clicked something in the recommendations. So yeah, it's the game we're forced to play, sadly.
But as you said earlier, you know, some people, for one reason or another, are perhaps a little bit more naive, and it simply won't do to just kind of, you know, write them off and say, oh well, naive people, blah blah blah. There is an ethical obligation to, let's say, the naive people, because you know, everybody has to start somewhere, right? When you're learning a subject, everybody starts from the beginning, and you need a bit of guidance. And you do rely, usually at school, your authority figures that you rely on are teachers. But when you're out in the internet, it's almost like the Wild West. You know, it's kind of hard to make that distinction between who is authority, who isn't authority, and who isn't. You know.
Yeah.
Very difficult. So have you found any useful ways to try and mitigate some of those issues, or some practices that you engage with, other than sort of deleting the more kind of provocative comments? Are there any other things that you do as an organization?
We make an effort to read every single comment that comes in. So you can see that this is the data from the last month, and that shows a total of 15,000 comments that have come in. And we have read every one of them. This is the blue line, by the way, and the left axis shows how many comments that is per day. So, for example, the big spike on the left, on that day, 1,000 or 960 comments came in, and we answered 198 of them. And so every day we do this community management, and we make sure to read everything. Whenever possible, we do engage with people who have questions or have feedback, or have a different perspective on what we say. And even if we don't agree from a historical standpoint, we do keep it up. We're not going to delete anything that we don't agree with, obviously. And we do engage, and we explain ourselves, we explain our methods, we explain our sources, we reason with them and try to, or have a equal debate, so to say. Which is hard because you don't know who these people are. You don't know what they want or sometimes what they mean. Not everyone is equally good in English. So yeah, but we do make a big effort to engage with that community and to not just be this authoritative figure and tell people what's what and then just leave it at that. I think at least half of our effort is making sure that we take care of what happens with a video once it's up.
That's what makes this kind of public intellectualism so fascinating for me, because the old, let's call them the old school mediums, they're a bit more passive in the sense that, let's say, I mean, this would never happen, but let's say I was invited onto BBC Radio 4 to talk about, I don't know, the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, and it's a 30-minute piece. It goes out and that's it. And you might get a few people who write a letter into the production team, but apart from that, there isn't, much engagement. But in your case, you're getting pretty much immediate responses and engagement, and as part of that, a contribution to your knowledge base and to the collective knowledge base. And that's awesome, because you're not just simply sharing information or knowledge, but information and knowledge is being formed and shared on a wider scale, and
yeah,
I think that's awesome. And within that, facilitating a healthy discussion and debate, that's something that I constantly emphasize to our students, that despite some of the, let's say, little competitions that go on in academia, ultimately it's still a communal affair, right? Because all research, whatever that may be, in whatever field, it is premised on the research that has come before it, and in turn it makes a contribution to that field. We're all sort of relating and working to each other, and in order for that to function appropriately, we have to be quite open, transparent, and willing to take on the constructive criticisms.
Yeah, I think we're a great gateway in that sense. So yeah, if someone watches our videos, they're all based on secondary sources and sometimes primary sources, but there's not a lot of original research in our videos. Then that might interest them to dig a little deeper and to take a look at the sources we used and to read those, and also look into the sources they have at home. A lot of people have letters from their families or photos or whatever, and they tell about it. So,
well, I mean, I think that idea of you being a gateway or a between space is crucial. Making that connection between, let's say, the research or the knowledge base and people who wouldn't ordinarily be part of that research or knowledge base. Not everybody goes to university, and that's absolutely fine. But, equally, you don't have to go to university to be interested in various topics or to be capable of engaging with those topics. And that's the main thing, that I think is important. There's a public duty there, especially for universities and therefore research that is publicly funded. It needs to find ways to reach beyond itself. And sometimes the problem with the subjects in the arts and humanities, social sciences to an extent in particular have, at least compared to something like engineering, is making that connection with the public. So for example, you could be working on, I don't know, aesthetic theory of the 17th century, and it's all very, Western Europe, 17th century, and it's all very involved and detailed and really wonderful research, but that research is basically just read by a handful of people, and it does certainly contribute within that handful of people. It contributes knowledge and understanding of the topic, but that's about it. And you'll be amazed at how many students and academics can end up feeling quite frustrated with that. They feel that they want to make a bit more of an impact, that they need to connect with the outside world a bit more, but they're not really sure how to do that. Whereas if you're an engineer, you know, you design something, it gets patented, and then it's sold on the market.
Yeah,
You see an immediate, tangible public benefit for it. So what you guys are doing is kind of, it is very much that gateway, that bridge between the two. And I think that's increasingly going to become important for those who are in academia and trying to find a way out.
Yeah, we are seeing that now with the series on the Indonesian War of Independence we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So with the Indonesian War of Independence, you can see that we engage with people who don't really know a lot about the history side of things, but who do have an opinion on colonialism or imperialism or colonial warfare, guerrilla warfare, or racism and stuff like that. And you can see that the debates are very emotional to people, and that is something that I rarely see in other videos. That's really something new for Indonesia. People say, I didn't know this before, and it means a lot to me. A lot of the research that has been done on this is very critical, and it's very honest about the stuff that the Dutch did. Like some studies are exploring if it was a genocide or not. And that's something that hasn't at all made it into the collective conscience of the Dutch. So you can see that very clearly there, that the academic community might think that knowledge is out there, right? They've been doing research on it for years, and they've putting paper out after paper after paper, and they've been interacting with each other. You can see in all these papers, they're referring each other. But still, it's such a big unknown black page in Dutch history, and everyone knows, oh yeah, we did something wrong, we called it police actions, it was really a colonial war, you know. But then when you see the comments of all the Dutch people saying, wow, I never knew this wasn't taught to me in school.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very good that you're doing this. So that, to me, that confirms that we are this bridge between academia and the public.
Yeah, I think, you know, performing that function, being that bridge is so incredibly valuable, because you're educating people, and who knows what implication that I have. It may, well, it will certainly improve understanding, but having that improved understanding will either directly or indirectly influence the way that people perceive the world, the way they perceive themselves, the way they engage with other people. It might make them, if not in that specific instance, more generally speaking, more appreciative of the nuances and complexities of history and the contemporary world around them. And I think that's the most fundamental thing to fighting or resisting or overcoming any kind of radicalization. Because I think radicalization thrives on reduction. Everything has to be reduced to these really kind of simple truths, these simple truths with inverted commas, in simple oppositions, right? Whereas to have a more mature understanding of the world is to appreciate its ambivalence. It's not always clear who the good guys are. It's not always clear that they were right, they were wrong.
When we want to offer more perspective, as you say, like never is anything really black and white. Mm-hmm. There's always multiple stories, and the same for Indonesia. Yes, the Dutch did horrible things, and only this week we remembered here in the Netherlands the horrible things the Japanese did to us and the Indonesians afterwards did to us. And one suffering doesn't make other suffering less important or less tragic.
Exactly.
But then when we start talking about this Blitzbird myth, or how the Dutch soldiers treated Indonesians, people say, "Oh, you're against the Dutch. You're globalist. You're this. You're that. You're against Brexit. You're leftist." And that's when offering multiple perspectives, which I think is good, is also seen as attacking the other perspective, right? Which is a shame, really. And I think that's part of the internet and YouTube.
again, for the students watching this, it's something they should think about. Again, if they want to do something like this with whatever topic, they just need to anticipate that there are some other forces at work that will seize upon, what they're doing, and it's probably good to have a strategy in mind, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we already briefly talked about the inner workings of YouTube and how we have to navigate that, and how others navigate that quite successfully, for, well, sometimes more political purposes. But we have to navigate the same software that YouTube uses for them to grow ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And well, if you take a look at the slide I made with the 6 thumbnails in it.
Mm-hmm.
So YouTube, roughly half of our viewers come from outside of our subscribers, which means that they clicked on the recommendations, so the recommended videos on the right side and on your homepage. And if a recommended video is being clicked, it will be recommended to more people, because YouTube thinks, oh, this is probably good content, otherwise you wouldn't have clicked, right? Okay. And that, together with average view time, determines how good a video is performing. Now, we are always doing good in view time, because we are not clickbait. We are delivering on, what we do. We have a lot of loyal viewers, so usually most people watch it to the end. But then we do have to play the game of the thumbnails and the titles, and drawing people in, because people who really like what we're to, they either probably are subscribed to us already, or they will if they encounter us. Mm-hmm. But since half of our viewers come from people who are not subscribed to us, we have to interest people who maybe wouldn't click on the Battle of Britain, or the Dunkirk evacuation. So in the top left, you can see the Dunkirk evacuation, which would interest a lot of people who are interested in history. Mm-hmm. But then, and that goes against my nature as a historian, triggering people with the first Brexit is, it's usually anachronistic to use Brexit in this context. And it's arguably somewhat clickbaity, because it's not about Brexit. But then also it's kind of funny because Britain exited from mainland Europe.
Yeah.
So this is a playful way to play YouTube's game, and we try to stay true to the historical side of it all.
That's something very important then for the students to understand. So this is kind of thinking more creatively on how you kind of draw people in to the content to begin with.
Yeah, and you might have to find a line between historical responsibility, because Yoram the historian would never say the first Brexit or Japan joins the Allies. He would just say Indonesians declare independence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But we have to play YouTube's game, so it's a give and take, which is I would prefer not to. Sure. Obviously, but then we lose the game, and there's other channels who do, and they might not value historical accuracy in their videos as much as we do. So then this is a small sacrifice.
It's interesting you say that, because there are a lot of parallels with how research works, certainly in the UK, because research is really valued according to these pretty clunky metrics that are supposed to give an indication of the impact and the quality, of certain journals and certain papers. And there's all sorts, as with most metrics, there are all sorts of problems with them. But unfortunately, a lot of government funding or research council funding is based on these impact factors, as we call them. So academics, particularly aspiring academics, PhD students, they have to be aware of this and also play the game. They have to play the system's game in order to be viable in the system. And like you, I wish it wasn't like that, but it is like that. So there's an element, there's a pragmatic element involved of just kind of, you know, accepting how something is and working within it, which doesn't mean that you can't ever question it or can't ever seek to challenge it, but you still need to be aware of how it works in order to work with it, basically.
Yeah, totally.
So on that subject, should we move on a little bit onto the kind of business model or funding of the project?
Yeah.
You touched on it a bit. You mentioned Patreon, but maybe you want to go into that a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. If you look at the slide with our Patreon growth, you can see this is of time goes. The Patreon page was set up in spring of 2018, and it's right about the time when they started doing the Between Two Wars series. And then you can see somewhere in between 2018 and 2019, there's a huge spike, which is when the first episode of World War II came out.
Okay.
And a large part of the community just came over from the Great War. It already existed. So the channel grew very rapidly as well. But as you can see, we've been steadily growing for the entire year. And you might notice that somewhere in 2019, there was a weird spike that doesn't really, that really comes out of nowhere. It was June last year, June 2019 or July.
Okay.
Which is not really, it wasn't really, didn't have to do with the content per se, because the invasion of France and Belgium had been in May, which was, you know, just steady organic growth. And then the Battle of Britain would start over the summer, which caused steady organic growth. But this had to do with demonetization of our videos on YouTube. And that actually has a lot to do with our monetization of the whole project, but also with our community, because obviously people see that a lot of effort goes into our content. It's the writing, the hosting, the editing, the history, who makes the maps. People can see of the quality, even though it might not be broadcast television quality. It's good quality for YouTube, especially the historical content. So people know it's a team and it's not just Indy in his basement, and they know we need money to do it. And then YouTube decided, they have done on several occasions, to crack down on monetizing stuff that might be seen as controversial to their advertisers. And that had to do with a scandal with a few very big YouTubers, among who PewDiePie, one of the biggest ones out there. He does gaming mostly, but he made some jokes about about a Jewish community, I think, and some racist jokes, and those videos were monetized. And the companies that had their ads shown in front of those videos were going like, YouTube, why are you doing this? We don't want to be seen on a video that has racist stuff in them.
Okay.
And then YouTube said, well, okay, all right. So it became a lot harder to get your videos monetized then. And what they now have is basically a list of keywords, and if those keywords show up in the description or in the tags you use or in the title, and I don't know, but maybe even in the video itself, maybe they just recognize the words spoken. YouTube is very non-transparent about this, so I don't know for sure. But in any case, they know we are making content about war, and therefore we do not get monetized at first, because this is just the algorithm saying, you probably make something that's not suitable for ads, right? And then I've got a slide about that. It's the one with the black stuff saying the following content has been. So YouTube's algorithm decides this is not okay, and in some cases they say, okay, just no monetization. And in other cases they say it's age restricted, so you have to be 18 or older to watch it. Wow. And in other cases they might say, you have to click this, which is the top black thing. You have to click this warning agreement to agree that you're going to watch something that might include inappropriate or offensive material. And that's what's generally become known as the adpocalypse. So YouTube removing monetization from videos. And it wasn't just historical channels, it's political channels, and it's gaming channels. And a lot of people were, especially people who depended on ad revenue alone, were hit by this.
Okay.
So then, if you take a look at the slide below that, we made a few videos saying YouTube is demonetizing us. They're demonetizing history content for being history content. Because if you go back, there's this video about feminism in the 1930s in America and Germany, which we called Chain Your Women to the Stove. And it was demonetized, and YouTube said it was demonetized because it's content that may be offensive to a marginalized group, but is used for education, news, or documentary purposes. Now, that marginalized group, I think they're referring to women. And if anything, we're explaining the dire position that women were in the 1930s. So is YouTube telling me that people are being offended by history? All right. And YouTube is deciding this based on financial motives. They want their advertisers to still work with them. So just to be sure, they're demonetizing historical content because it might offend people, which I don't think it does. Or if it does, for the right reasons. And yeah, so we made a few videos about that for our community videos, saying YouTube is demonetizing history videos. And that kind of went viral because people were outraged with how YouTube approaches history and how we are doing something that YouTube should be happy with, because apparently they have a problem with extremist content on their platform, while we arguably counter that. And yet we are being hit by that, because if you're being demonetized, then YouTube will recommend you less often, because and then you will get less views and you will grow less fast, because obviously YouTube is gonna only give its real estate in the recommendation section away to videos that they can make money off themselves as well, even though they deny they do this. Our data is pretty clear about that. That's how it works. If something is demonetized, it will get less views.
Wait, so YouTube haven't confirmed that's how it goes. This is something that you've seen as a kind of passive data. Yeah,
this is Spartacus is quite good with analyzing data. YouTube, of course, is saying that it's not recommending demonetized videos less, so we shouldn't be worried about that. YouTube is not confirming this. I don't know why, but they're not. They're being, as I said, not transparent about how their algorithm works and what they base their decision on at all. But anyway, we made a few videos on that, and then if you go back to the Patreon growth line, that's what explains the growth in Patreon in the summer of 2019, because we made those videos and people were like, oh, well, if YouTube's not going to pay you to do it, then we are. So that shows to us that people they care about our content and they think it's important enough to support us, especially when it's being arguably censored by YouTube.
So you've basically managed to, so there's a good story in this. You've managed to cultivate quite a loyal, let's say, I don't know, fan base or community.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a real testament to the work you've been doing. I mean, is there anything else, particularly on the role that the community play in the production that you want to touch on? I guess it sort of relates to this kind of Patreon support and that response to monetization.
I already explained to you how we answer every comment we get. Oh no, we don't answer every comment. We look at every comment, we read every comment, but we answer as many as possible. And you can really see that that helps with building a community and showing them that you value the work, the effort they put in writing the comments as much as they value you making the content. And some of them put a lot of effort in their comments, and just a simple thank you or thanks for sharing or really engaging with the comments by reacting on it or debating it, really helps build a community and helps them returning and helps them identifying as your community, and ultimately for them to become financial supporters of you. So that engagement, that interaction is really, really, really important.
Was there anything else that was unexpected or has been unexpected whilst being part of this project, maybe at the beginning or even now, things that you just didn't anticipate that actually proved to be either problematic or at least deserving of some real attention?
Yeah, I guess you only have to think about production and content and the amount of work you want to put into the videos compared to what it delivers. Because it's not just getting the story out there, it's also making sure that people see the story. Arguably, it's even more about that than getting a story out there, because it's already out there if you've published papers about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And especially if you don't have a team surrounding you with knowledge of editing and knowledge of YouTube and community management, or who has the time to do community management or to monetize it, then I can see that as a big challenge as well. So I can fully recommend trying to find colleagues or friends or partners who do know how to edit, if you don't know how to do that yourself. And to build a good set. If you take a look at the first episode of our World War II series, you take a look at the set and how it's lighted and the frame, then it's so much worse than what it looks like even a half a year later, when we really started putting resources and capable people on the job. No disrespect to Spartacus, but he was doing everything himself back then. He was building the set, he was filming, he was editing, he was doing community management, he was doing publishing, he was making sure people were paying. Not only is it hard work, it's just like you can't expect one person to have all that knowledge and all that, all those skills.
It's like that saying, the jack of all trades but master at none. If you're trying to do everything at once, you inevitably cannot be at your game on all of them. At the top of your game on all of them. It's just not how it works. That's why we have division of labor, I suppose. Yeah. Okay. So that's okay. That's a really useful suggestion, because I think the temptation for a lot of students might be to just try and kind of go on their own. And I suppose if they're just kind of treating it as a little hobby on the side, maybe that's less of a problem. But if they're seeking to actually create something more sustainable and perhaps even something that would be a source of income for them, they would really need to think about collaborating with others, I suppose.
Yeah. And well, there's a lot of creators out there that do create every once in a while, and when it comes out, it's absolutely amazing, and people know that, and they wait for it, and they wait months, and people are thrilled when it comes out and it has millions of views instantly, which I guess it's their strategy and it works for them. It's not our experience, but it's like there's a lot of roads leading to Rome, right? You don't have to take hours. But I think that is a challenge that you have to be very aware of. YouTube might seem like this democratic tool that can make anyone famous and can that you can use to get the word out there. And a lot of companies, I speak people from a lot of media organizations or NGOs, and they say, we want to reach more people. Well, let's just do a podcast, or let's just do a YouTube channel. And it's not that easy. You're not going to reach thousands of people without putting proper work in it. And not to be discouraging or anything, but it can be done, definitely.
but it has to be thought about. And I think that's a point that
Yeah.
you really need to, I think that's a point that's really worth making, and that the students need to take on board, that it's not just some, you know, if you're going to do it properly.
Yeah, I mean, it's much more than putting your work on a public platform. It requires a different method, a different thought to actually reach and engage with people that are not familiar with academic history.
You know, absolutely. Having to adapt from an academic writing style to a, let's say, more publicly engaging writing style or performance or oral presentation, whatever that may be. It might sound theoretically quite easy to somebody who's never tried it before, but it's actually incredibly difficult. Especially, you know, you're in academia or you're doing a master's or a PhD, you're constantly being told and trained even to write in this very, very specific formal way. And even the specifics of that formality change from discipline to discipline. So even within the academic context, there's a difference in presentation, a difference in vocabulary and style. To then go from that to, let's say, a YouTube video, it's quite a leap. And I think it's probably takes a bit of time to finesse that, a bit of practice, learning from others. I guess some people are probably more, you know, they're naturals more so than others. Perhaps maybe they have a more kind of performative aspect to them, and maybe that even speaks to the value of working as a team and finding other people and kind of playing to your strengths, you know.
Yeah, I definitely had to learn that myself, and it was not easy, especially since I'm not an English native, and my vocabulary is limited. Yeah, I was lucky to have a background in journalism as well. So I was trained on creative writing in Dutch, but I managed to adapt. That's our former intern just messaged me the other day saying, I'm writing my thesis and I'm writing all this informal language now, and I have to stop it. But it's it's a challenge. But I think for if you're in academics and you want to reach people outside your field, or your ivory tower, whatever. Doing that or making that your own is absolutely necessary.
Yeah. Okay.
And that means that you have to deal with stuff like editing and with monetization and with community management. And community management means that you're going to have to deal with a lot of people who are internet veterans with their own. Well, the internet is a strange place, and with its own means and its own way of interacting, and with the politics that come with that. So, as I said, a discussion on what Nazism and socialism have in common is very different on the internet than it would be in an academic place. Also, most academics are pretty focused on one topic, but think about what's your channel going to be about? Just random stuff or one theme, or are you, like us, going to do a chronological rundown of events or explanation of theories? A lot of stuff is possible, and I would love to see more content by academics.
Absolutely, I feel that way too, and I think that is one of the critical skills that we're eager to and should develop in our PhD students. That ability to engage with the public, so that whatever work they go into after their PhDs, and it could be academia, but it could be industry. They could do something independently, be self-employed. It doesn't matter whatever it is. to give them the capability and the will to still function as a public intellectual of some sort, right, of some variety, to value what they have to offer to the public and to offer it. And I think that's really important. And I just want to reiterate that what you guys are doing at Time Ghost is, I personally think, just fantastic, and very grateful to have you with us today, and to have you again with us in the future. I think it's very good of you to share your insights and your knowledge with the students. I think it's good, it's hugely valuable. There's a lot to learn from what you guys are doing and what you have done. So thank you very much for being with us.
Well, as a final note, this conversation probably made that already very clear. It's a very moving, like, dynamic field, and a lot of stuff is still being discovered, and a lot of stuff is changing. The way in which academia and the public interact with each other through new media like YouTube, still being theorized and being discussed and being researched, which I would love to read more about and see more academics be aware of, that this is a meeting place of worlds, which deserves to be studied. And
absolutely,
yeah, it's exciting times.
It is indeed. Okay, well, we'll conclude there for now, and there's going to be some additional information just below the video, including a link to the Time Ghost page, so make sure you check that out. And of course, as I said, there's going to be a follow-up session to this. It will actually be in the flesh, and we hope that's sooner rather than later, but of course information on that will follow in due course. And as ever, if you have any additional questions, feel free to email me directly, or to just email researcher developer, and that will get through to the appropriate person. So for now, that's all the best from me, and I hope you're all keeping safe and well. Jeroen, would you like to say goodbye to our folks at home?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me, and yeah, well, let me know in the comments down below what you think of it.
Absolutely. So, bye bye for now.
Cool, bye.